Days Gone is desperate for a second chance. It was announced back at E3 2016, first with a trailer to get us all excited, and it actually looked pretty good. And then second was a gameplay segment to close out the show. This gameplay segment has been the bane of Days Gone's existence ever since. Rather than just being shown a game, it seemed as though Sony Bend was showing off a tech demo, and whilst it was a very impressive tech demo, it seemed hollow and bland. It seemed to just be a stereotypical zombie game, and now having learned more about the game, that seems to be a far cry from the truth. I myself am very excited for the game, but it seems as though very few people are in the same boat. The initial showing of Days Gone has created an uphill battle for itself, one where it now has to work twice as hard to impress and differentiate. Days Gone is currently in the middle of month-long coverage, and it looks as though it's very keen to impress. So far, we've been treated to around 2+ hours of new gameplay. Some of it shows some real promise. So let's weigh out the pros and cons of what we know so far about Days Gone. Let's see if we can change some hearts and minds and bring people over to the excited camp, but let's also try and offer some constructive criticism to Sony Bend Studio, so that they may try to further improve the game. Because I don't think anybody wants this game to be bad. You'd be a bit of a sadistic bastard if you did. The game shows some real promise, and I think it's up to us to tell Sony Bend what's not really working so well so they can tweak and fix everything. So let's jump in. So let's start off with some of the good stuff, shall we? First off, we've got a great looking open world with dynamic weather and daylight systems. The fact that you can be exploring the open world, going from mission to mission, or just looting certain places, and then all of a sudden it starts to rain, or the sun sets, and then the freakers become more powerful, really helps make the game's open world feel far more organic than it could be. And in this open world, you can enter about 99% of buildings. It hardly takes place in a metropolis, so you're not going to be going in any skyscrapers, but it's still a very ambitious task, and it helps to engross you in the act of looting. This open world is also dangerous. Most games will let you free to explore, and you'll interact with an enemy here and there, and if you don't want to interact with them, you can just go around them. But Days Gone seems to have put an emphasis on making you feel threatened at every single moment, emphasizing also why the bike is so necessary. If you go out without your bike, on foot, chances are a couple of freakers are going to jump on your back, most likely in succession, making it very difficult, and if you run into a horde, you're pretty much done. But even whilst you're on the bike, you're still in constant danger. You can be attacked by rabid wolves, or a freaker could jump you straight off of your bike. I like the idea of the game being difficult, not just because freakers are difficult to kill and they take a few shots, or the humans in the open world are difficult to kill, but because just as you're going from place to place, moment to moment, you are in constant danger. You're constantly on your toes, and it forces the player to be better than they are. Speaking of the freakers, the hordes that you can get in this game are incredible. So far, we've seen quite a few different varieties of hordes, but in some of the Game Informer coverage, they show off what they refer to as a baby horde, and it's about 300 strong. If that's what they call a baby horde, I'm really interested to see what a regular horde looks like, or a big horde. We're probably looking at freakers of 1,000+. And freakers also seem to have an ecosystem. They need to sleep and feed. They attack each other if somebody gets out of hand, and they even become more powerful at night. Some of them even seem to have their own territories. For example, the younger looking freakers, they go up on the rooftops and they won't attack unless provoked. There are human enemies as well, besides the regular bandits that you come to expect from a game like this. Namely a clan called the Rippers, or the Rest in Peace clan. These people worship the freakers and believe that whatever has happened to the world is some kind of divine intervention and it's the way forward. I reckon the only reason they stay around is to ensure the freakers' mission is successful. As I mentioned earlier, the bike is important. Very important, in fact. It's the only one you've got. You can't just go crazy with it and ramp off and leave it in a lake, because that's your bike. That's the only way you're getting around. It's up to you to maintain it with fuel and upgrade it at your leisure. It seems as though the bike is being treated as a second character, and whilst at first glance to me this sounded somewhat annoying, I didn't want to have to care for a bike, but it seems as though it adds to the gameplay mechanics. You're supposed to be mindful of where you leave and manage your bike before you enter any given situation, as if you park up too close to a situation, you could alert the enemies and they could come rushing you straight away, or if you park a little too far away, you might have the element of surprise, but if something goes wrong and you need a quick getaway, you've got to run quite a bit further to get your bike back. Let's talk about looting in the game as well, because from what I've seen, it seems to be a mechanic that actually makes sense within the world. For example, the vehicles that you loot actually have the right kind of loot for their vehicle. For instance, you could have a cop car and it would have ammunition in the back, or you could find an ambulance which would have medical supplies. Also, another thing that you can loot is currency, and the currency in this world is freaker ears. So if you shoot a freaker in the head, you might not get 2 ears to use because you might have damaged one ear on the bullet's way out. which could mean that when you're encountering smaller groups of enemies, you actually think about the way you approach them. You don't want to shoot them in the head all the time because you want to get that credit. There also seems to be an emphasis on some kind of golden path, which is basically the narrative linear path that you're usually accustomed to. However, this time for Days Gone, it's in an open world. And rather than just having you bounce between different missions that are part of the main quest, Sony Bend seem to have put a particular emphasis on making everything feel like it's part of the open world, but as unique as possible. One thing they used to describe this is the fact that you're not going to see the guy that comes down the road with a shopping cart to give you a quest. That guy doesn't exist in this world. It seems as though they wanted to get rid of as much kind of open world cannon fodder as they could. And though we haven't been treated to much of the narrative in the game just yet, it seems pretty promising, especially given that the voice acting is kinda great so far. Speaking of narrative, there's also a certain decision-making aspect of the game. Many people seem to be down on this at the moment because in the demo, the person playing makes a decision to not kill a guy, as to torture him and let the freakers get him. But as soon as you make this decision, your friend Boomer shoots him in the head anyway. Many people seem to be upset about this because it seems to be the Telltale style of thinking. You make a decision but nothing actually comes of consequence from it. However, the developers from Days Gone have said that these decisions seem to be there to develop Deacon and his relationships rather than the overarching story of the world. Okay, so now let's talk about the important stuff. The bad stuff. This is what's going to help Sony Bend actually improve the game to make the best game possible. So if at any point you agree with anything that I've said in this video, please for the love of God, go and tell Sony Bend, help them improve. I believe that it's kind of our duty as gamers and consumers, as cheesy as that sounds, to put forward constructive criticism for a developer. It's hard to always see what's wrong with your game when you sit in your own bubble for so long. So first off, Days Gone looked very rough around the edges, and yes, I know it says alpha gameplay in big bold letters across the screen, but a lot of people are just going to ignore that. So whilst people like you and I may look at this and think, wow, that's really good for alpha, a lot of regular people are going to look and say, well, this game hasn't come along very far since I last seen it. I'm not going to pay money for this game. It's things like this make me think that maybe they should have held off just a little bit longer and maybe shown it when they got into the beta phase, because after E3 Judges Week, it seems like they're just about to enter that. Although I'm pretty certain that this Game Informer coverage was put specifically here right in front of E3 to quell any sort of worries as to why Days Gone didn't show up at E3 in any big meaningful way. I'm very certain that there's going to be another trailer there, but people would probably question, why not another 10-minute demo? Is the game in trouble? Is it not making progress in a great way? So this is definitely to put those naysayers to rest. But back to the whole alpha gameplay thing. People might start to think that this isn't making progress because a lot of the problems that I see in this current Game Informer footage is problems that I saw back at E3 2017, especially the melee combat. It seems as though whenever Deacon swings his baseball bat, his knife, or his crowbar, that he's just carrying out an animation and that anybody that gets hit is just in the way. I guess that the best way to describe it would be that whenever Deacon's animation carries out, it just carries out. It's not really tracking towards anything. And it seems as though this problem is even more evident in the Game Informer coverage. And I don't just mean in that weird instance where he tries to stab a freaker and he spins around it. That's clearly a bug. I mean the regular stuff. It looks like whenever he swings in combat, he's swinging aimlessly. Another big problem that I've seen is the sound design. It's just really weird in places. For example, there's stuff like the VO. Now the VO is great, but there's some points when they're talking on the back of a bike, so they're talking really loudly to overshadow the engine. But they've just jumped off the bike and they're still shouting. It just seems weird. Especially considering that this portion of the game, Boomer's driving the bike, not the player. Deacon is the backseater. So it kind of throws out any sort of possibility that they just arrived at a destination quicker than the conversation was able to play out. Since this section is so on rails, it really should line up perfectly and there shouldn't be any excuse for this to happen. Whilst we're on the subject of the bike as well, when you drive through puddles in this game, it sounds like you're not driving through a puddle. It sounds like someone's just thrown a stone in a lake. You either need to modify that sound or get it out completely. I suspect maybe it's some sort of a placeholder for now, but we're less than a year out from this game's release. I'm fairly certain that this game's going to be out by February, January 2019. I really do feel like this is a problem that should have already been fixed. However, I'm not a game developer, so I don't necessarily know the order of operations for things. Another thing about the bike that is incredibly annoying, but you may not have noticed at all, is the bike's engine loop noise. It sounds as though it's constantly accelerating and shifting gear. There's never any sort of, we've got to top gear and we're staying here, and there's also no deceleration. And I expect quite a lot of you have probably thought, well, I didn't hear it, so this probably isn't going to be a problem when I play the final game. But I thought that too. I read a comment, went back to the video, watched it, and now I can't unhear it. Imagine playing an entire game of that. A lot of people have also been saying that there's a problem with the gun sounds. Now, I don't really think that's as terrible, but to each their own, I guess. Let's jump back to the bike gameplay for a second. It seems kind of slow. Am I the only one that thinks that? I get that upgrading your bike is a big part of the game, but the bike that you use in the very first mission is supposed to be a really good and upgraded bike. It's supposed to emphasize why you want to upgrade your bike and get back to that point after you lose it. But it still seems slow when moving through the environment. This could be because the world is a lot smaller than the developers anticipated it to be, and when they turned up the bike speed, they were going across terrain far too quickly. But to that I would say, just turn it up anyway. What's the point of the world being big if it feels terrible to get around in? I would much rather a smaller, more confined world, but I feel awesome when I'm going through it. I also want to jump back to the VO again just for a second, because the breathing in some of the dialogue sounds excessively loud. It gives such a stark contrast between portions of VO, especially when other sounds in the environment stop. So I wouldn't recommend that you get rid of the heavy breathing sounds because it does add to the atmosphere. It does make me feel like Deacon is actually running around and is out of breath. But maybe just turn it down a little bit so it's not quite as noticeable. Another problem that I've noticed is that the game's transitions between cutscenes and gameplay is fading to black. Every single time. And this may sound like a petty complaint, but you're really going to notice jumping in and out of a black screen just to go back and forth between cutscenes and gameplay. This seems to be a very old-fashioned problem for such a new game. And again, this could just be because it's in an alpha stage, but I don't remember seeing this in any other portions of gameplay. It really has to be fixed. I've also seen a few people say that the running animation seems to have a problem. It seems as though the loop is kind of obvious. You can see when it starts and restarts. For me personally, it doesn't seem like that much of an issue, but if you have this many people talking about the same problem, then perhaps I'm just the outlier here. Another thing that I could bring up is the framerate drops. However, this is alpha footage, and if you're going to show alpha footage, the one thing that you should be allowed to excuse is framerate drops. So that's just something we're going to have to watch out for as the game develops and as it gets closer to release. Another big problem is the UI. It seems to be incredibly excessive. When you shoot an enemy, there's XP popping up all over the place, and it seems to distract from the realistic experience that the developers seem to be trying to create. There's also the fact that the mission objective comes up on the screen but then stays there for the entire mission. It should really be a case of the mission objective popping up in the top left corner, letting the player know what they're supposed to do, and then it's slowly fading away. If the player is at any point confused and forgets what they have to do, just have it so that they can open up the pause menu and see what they're supposed to be doing right there and then. Also, I think that they can afford to get rid of the minimap entirely in favour of a more compass-style mechanic. It seems to have worked really well for games like Horizon and God of War, so I think maybe taking up that much of the screen just for a minimap is kind of redundant nowadays. It would definitely help players to see more of the screen, aiding in building immersion. And even if someone gets so hopelessly lost that the compass doesn't work, they'll still be able to open up the map in the main menu, so problem solved. Days Gone clearly still has a ways to go, but it isn't coming out until early 2019, so hopefully they can fix a lot of these problems. They've definitely got the time to do so. Hopefully these criticisms have brought new problems to their attention rather than just reiterating ones that they have already planned to fix in the future. I've got a lot of faith in Bend Studios to get this done, as the ambition of this project when compared to their previous titles shows a lot of passion and hard work for the project. And now that everyone's raving about Sony's exclusive lineup, I doubt that they want to be the ones to ruin the hot streak. The pressure is definitely on for them. Also, if the Game Informer coverage has showed me anything, the developers at this studio seem like a really lovely bunch of people. They're very hardworking, they're very talented. They just need to stay critical of their own ideas and listen to some of the feedback from the Game Informer coverage. Yeah, some of it's going to be trolls, but a lot of it's actually very useful information. So, I'm wishing the best of luck to Bend Studio. This is really their chance to prove themselves. It's their first massive game. So all the best, guys.